The big question for many people is why the strikes are going ahead. Essentially, it comes down to a dispute over pay and job cuts. On one side, the unions want a 7% pay rise for workers, many of whom worked through the pandemic. They want that to keep up with the rising cost of living. They also want protection against job cuts, with between 2,000 and 2,500 said to be at risk. Meanwhile, the operators say they simply need to cut costs after COVID, with fewer people taking the train than they did 2 years ago. And that, of course, means revenue is down to about 54% of pre-pandemic levels. So how does this affect you? Well, it's thought thousands of NHS appointments and operations could be missed as a result. In addition, it's exam week, and around 17 GCSEs and another 22 A-level papers could be disrupted. And of course, there's Glastonbury Festival. 200,000 people are expected to attend, so it's sure to add some extra traffic onto the roads if trains aren't available.
We're going to hear from these two in a moment for you on 5 News. That's Sian Elliott from the TUC and Darwin Friend from the Taxpayers Alliance is here in the studio with us. Thank you very much for being with us today. In a moment we'll do that, but first we've been hearing from you right around the country today. Here's a flavour of exactly what you think.
I had to take holiday because otherwise I physically wouldn't be able to get either to work or back home.
If I were to travel, I'd go on the bus, but I'm just not going to bother even trying, to be honest.
It's affected lots of people, but at the same time, people have got to stand up and say, well, we need better conditions, better wages, and all the rest of it.
I understand why they're striking, but it is a little bit annoying for people who need to get places.
Well, they haven't given much guidance or anything. I don't really know what bus to get or anything. I have to look online.
I'm really annoyed about it. I've been threatened that I could lose my job, if I can't get into work.
I'm a public sector worker as well, and we're facing another pay cut. 20 years pay cuts, not good enough really. I'm still doing the same work and more, and it's just not right. So I'm fully behind them, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very anti it. They've been blessed, those drivers, been blessed. All the RMT have been blessed over the last 2.5 years. They've been paid every month. What impact have they had? None. Selfish.
Right, so that is what some of you think. Let's speak to Sian from the Trades Union Congress, as we said, and Darwin from the Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you to both of you for joining in on what is something I think we're going to be talking about not just this week, but for a while. Sian, let's start with you and ask you to sort of lay the case out, if you like. Why are you supporting these strikes?
These strikes are indeed about pay, but they're also about job cuts. And what's really important there is those job cuts are people who are working on maintaining our tracks, on incident response teams, they're controllers and signallers. They're really important jobs that ensure that we have a high quality, safe transport network. And what we're deeply concerned about is at the moment, the job cuts proposed by the train operators, which have come about because government have slashed funding to our rail network, are endangering passengers. And so our members are going out on strike tomorrow and in the coming days. Yes, because of pay, because that's a serious issue for them, but it's also about protecting passengers across the country and making sure that they are safe while using our rail network.
Darwin, this is about pay, this is about safety. Surely these people have a right to strike over these issues.
Well, of course, Dan, and thank you very much for having me on the show. And we, of course, support the right to strike, but not this strike. This is, after all, a critical piece of national infrastructure. And by going on strike, these workers are going to bring the economy to a halt. And that's not just going to be bad for those workers, but it's also going to be bad for hard-working taxpayers who can't get to work during the week. It's going to be bad for kids even, Dan, who can't go to their exams potentially. And so when the government has given £16 billion during the pandemic to railways, I don't think it's right to ask them now to cough up more when they're facing a 70-year high tax burden during a cost of living crisis.
I'll bring in Tessa in a minute with some of our viewers' comments. But Sian, just to put the point that quite a few people are making today that Darwin touched on there, I was listening to somebody on the radio earlier who's saying they're a doctor and they can't do the 5 operations they had booked in on Thursday because they can't get from Reading to London. So they've had to cancel those operations, which has an impact not only on those 5 children and 5 families, but on the next set of children and 5 families who would have had the next set of operations. How do you respond to those, I suppose, practical concerns about the delays right across the country?
Well, of course we sympathise, and this is absolutely an option of last resort. It's not something that unions and their members wanted to do. We wanted to get round the table with employers, but crucially with government. As Darwin said, investment was made during the pandemic, but over £5 million of that was hived off into private pockets because it was made in profits. What we want to see is investment in our rail network, in the workforce that are ensuring it's a high quality, safe service. And that's not happening. And what we needed to see was not only employers round the table as we had today, but government too, together reaching a solution. And we haven't seen that. If taxpayers are concerned about how their money's being spent, about protecting the public purse, government should absolutely be at that table, making sure their interests and the interests of all of us who are paying tax are looked after. And let's remember, those rail workers are part of our key workforce who kept on going out to work during the pandemic to keep our country going. This is an action they want to take. They were taking their own lives into their hands when they were going out in the early days of the pandemic to keep on going, to keep our country and our economy moving.
Sian, Darwin, listening, because I will come back to you both on this issue, but I'm really fascinated by what our viewers are saying tonight, Tess, on this topic.
Yeah, we've had loads of people getting in touch, and as you might expect, opinion is really divided. Let me give you a flavour of some of those. Chris from Dumfries, for example, chimes with what Sian was saying there. He says, I support the strike totally. The government should enter the talks. The government is fuelling the fire with some of their remarks, he said. Mimi from Middlesex also supports the strike. She said, we have to understand that everything has gone up except wages. How else are we going to cope with price increases, she says. Then we've got Ken from Glasgow who says, the government wanted us to pull our belts in a bit to keep inflation low. Now we need the government to help us with higher pay. Then we've got some very much against the strikes. For example, an anonymous one from somewhere in Yorkshire who says, we have no buses and no trains. I live in a village and it's a nightmare. And then Glyn says, get rid of the drivers and automate the trains.
OK, well, Darwin, there's a number of points that Tessa picked up on there. But on that general issue of the fact that we're in a cost of living crisis, and if these people who are choosing to strike can't get the money that they need, and you say that this isn't the right time and they shouldn't be doing this, what other options are available to them?
Well, what I would say is that we are all in this crisis together, and unfortunately inflation could be up at 11% soon, and so this is an issue that's facing workers up and down the country. And I think if we were to give more money now in higher pay rises to public sector workers, then that could stoke the inflationary crisis further. And so what I would be saying is that we should be working together. Rail workers should be staying in their positions during this week, during the strikes, rather than leaving people stuck at stations when they should be, as I mentioned, getting to work, getting to GP appointments, getting to their exams.
Sian, can I ask you, are you worried that by the end of this week, considering that people are already angry, that public opinion will have turned against those workers?
I think, as the comments just showed, actually there's a real balance of people who, yes, are inconvenienced, but also those who really support the strike. Darwin said we're all in this together. We're not all in this together. City bonuses and kind of high earning, those wages have risen. Our new analysis showed that city bonuses are rising 5 times as fast as wages. And what's happening in the public sector is pay is actually falling by £130 last month compared with the previous month. We aren't all in this together. And what government are asking is for public sector workers to pay the price of this cost of living crisis. They're saying nothing about excess profits. Okay. They're saying nothing about those bonuses. If we are truly all in this together, it's about making sure the burden falls equally on all of us, and perhaps a little more so on those with the heaviest shoulders who can carry it. And that's not happening.
Sian Elliott and Darwin Friend, really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much for taking part in that debate for us.